America-China feud has begun. How successful is American strategy? There is no question that China has won the first round in its geopolitical contest with America. By plunging into a major geopolitical contest, possibly the biggest ever in human history, without first working out a comprehensive long-term strategy, the Trump administration has only succeeded in diminishing America's standing in the world while, at the same time, creating space for China's influence to grow in the world. Let there be no doubt that America lacks a comprehensive strategy on China. The US had a comprehensive bipartisan strategy towards China from the opening in 1972 until recently to integrate China into the world, politically, economically and culturally. But in recent years, that strategy produced complications and complexities helped usher in a new, more powerful China that did not conform to Western expectations. In the wake of this transformation, the US has been frozen. It has not been able to conceive of a new comprehensive strategy toward the Middle Kingdom. The contrast with how America launched its epic struggle against the Soviet Union could not be more striking. America's leading strategic thinker of that time, future American historians will undoubtedly be puzzled that so many Americans, including leading Democrats, cheered on Donald Trump when he began his trade and technology war against China. This Democratic support is puzzling because many of Trump's actions have actually served China's interests. There is no doubt that China's leaders have been aggravated by Trump's trade war and assault on Hawaii. Yet, the Chinese leaders must also be aware that Trump has provided China many long-term dividends. Many of these dividends come from Trump and his advisors not thinking long-term strategies. America would present a formidable challenge to China if it were a united, strong, and self-confident country. It is emphasized that American power depended on its ability to create among the peoples of the world generally the impression of a country which knows what it wants, which is coping successfully with the problems of its internal life and with the responsibilities of a world power, and what has a spiritual vitality capable of holding its own among the major ideological currents of the time. Trump has done the opposite. He has divided and polarized America. Yet it would be unfair to blame him alone. As this is documented, America is facing severe structural challenges in the political, economic, and cultural dimensions. To outsiders, it appears that America today lacks the spiritual vitality. However, Trump's administration must take sole blame for following a unilateral, rather than a multilateral, approach to deal with China. He provided China a major geopolitical gift by walking away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a brilliant move by the Obama administration to anchor America's presence in East and Southeast Asia, which would have yielded rich, long-term dividends for the American economy. Historically, at the beginning of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, America took the lead in building the world's multilateral architecture, which included the Bretton Woods system, the Marshall Plan, and NATO. Now it is China, not America, that is taking the lead in building a new multilateral architecture, including the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road Initiative. America opposed both these initiatives. This didn't stop many of its key friends and allies from joining them. The UK, Germany, India, and Vietnam joined as founding members of AIIB, which is proving itself to be a better governed institution than the IMF and the World Bank, with its standards of corporate governance is higher and more transparent. While China projects an image of being a stable and predictable member of the global multilateral order, America is increasingly perceived as a chaotic and unpredictable actor. Donald Trump once famously said that trade wars are good and easy to win. Instead, records in this area show that trade wars are in fact very difficult to win. But, the numbers suggest that Washington is not winning this trade war. Although China's economic growth has slowed, the tariffs have hit U.S. consumers harder than their Chinese counterparts. With fears of a recession around the corner, Trump must reckon with the fact that his current approach is imperiling the U.S. economy, posing a threat to the international trading system, and failing to reduce the trade deficit that he loathes. America has, of course, made things worse by launching a series of chaotic and uncoordinated measures against China beginning in 2018. The first anti-China measures were the 25% tariffs America imposed on China on July 6, 2018. Clearly, this tax on intermediate inputs would only undermine the competitiveness of American companies. This was unwise, but on July 6, 2018, the United States went ahead. No one in the America administration worked out a thoughtful and well-considered strategy before launching the first round of these tariffs, which were followed by many more rounds. At the same time, America may have expected China to capitulate as soon as tariffs were imposed. Anyone with a basic understanding of China and its recent history would have known that this would never have happened. Hence, if the goal of the America administration had been to reduce the trade deficit with China, China would have cooperated. However, the goals of the America administration have never been clear. The U.S. administration's current position seeks to change China's practices in order to boost U.S. exports, protect intellectual property and technology, and counter discrimination against overseas investors. These actions would expand American economic ties with China. America was generally perceived to be a reliable partner by its closest allies. This sense of trust in America has diminished considerably. The worst-case scenario for China would have been a reenactment of the containment policy that America has successfully used against the Soviet Union. Under America, the chances of this happening are practically zero. Unfortunately, even after he leaves office, the next president will not be able to restore the trust in America that America has eroded. It would be truly unwise for any American to underestimate the erosion of trust in America. Many of America's best friends have warned America to take it seriously. Under Trump's administration, America has become a rogue superpower. No society is invulnerable. Every society has its own weaknesses. This is why the erosion of global trust in America is so dangerous. It could in turn expose the area of America's maximum vulnerability, indeed, its Achilles heel, the dollar. Even if the US dollar is currently well protected by a complex global financial system, which in turn generates a sense of invulnerability. Yet, a core vulnerability remains. More than most countries, America can afford to live beyond its means, although financial globalization has enabled some countries with strong domestic institutions and good macroeconomic fundamentals, like Australia and Canada, to also sustain prolonged periods of current account and fiscal deficits. It is well known that domestically, the U.S. government spends more than it collects in income. This creates a fiscal deficit. In opposite, internationally, America imports more goods than it exports. This creates a trade deficit. How does America pay for these twin deficits? It borrows money. This is not abnormal. Many countries, not unlike many domestic households, borrow money. At some point, when they can no longer borrow money, they face a crunch. This is what happened to Greece. It had to cut its expenditures drastically so that it could continue to receive funds from overseas. As a result, its population suffered a severe drop in standards of living. However, unlike these other countries, America can fund its twin deficits and pay for its excess expenditures by printing treasury bills, while the U.S. Treasury only has to pay for the cost of paper. In return for handing out pieces of paper, the rest of the world sends real money, hard-earned cash, to buy the U.S. Treasury bills. For example, Chinese workers have to work hard to produce low-cost goods to export to the rest of the world. These exports receive hard-earned dollars, which the Chinese government converts to yuan to pay to the workers. What does the Chinese government do with these hard-earned dollars? It uses many of these to buy U.S. Treasury bills. The U.S. Treasury then uses these dollars from China to pay for excess government expenditures. America is not an emerging country. It's an unrivaled financial superpower, a position built in large part on hard-won trust in the dollar, which is an enduring source of American power and prosperity. The world has been happy to use the US dollar as the global reserve currency because they trusted the US government to make the right decisions on the US dollar that would take into consideration the economic interests not only of the 330 million American people but also of the remaining 7.2 billion people outside America, who also rely on the US dollar to fund their international transactions. This trust is a key pillar of the resilience of the US dollar as a global reserve currency. In recent decades, this trust has begun to erode because America has occasionally used the privilege of having the global reserve currency as a weapon against other countries. Here is an example of how the US dollar has been weaponized. Both involve American efforts to isolate Iran. In 2012, a British bank, Standard Chartered, was fined $340 million because it had used the US dollar to finance a trade transaction with Iran. This fine clearly represented an extraterritorial application of American domestic laws. As a British bank, Standard Chartered had broken no British laws. Neither had it violated any sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council. Yet, the dominance of the US dollar in international financial transactions enabled America to punish a British firm for breaking American laws, a clear weaponization of the US dollar. Many countries that had trusted the US dollar now find it to be a double-edged sword, cutting the fingers of whoever holds it. This creates an obvious incentive to reduce dependence on the US dollar, which could eventually precipitate a fall in global demand for US dollars, crippling the United States' ability to finance its twin deficits. The most dangerous thing that the last American administration has done is to create a strong incentive for other countries to stop relying on the US dollar as the dominant global reserve currency. In particular, by pulling out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which 6 countries, namely America, the UK, France, Germany, Russia, China, and Iran, had agreed to. More ominously for America, some influential voices are now saying that the world should stop using the US dollar as the global reserve currency. The dollar represents the currency of choice for at least half of international trade invoices, around 5 times greater than the US share in world goods imports, and 3 times its share in world exports, and 2/3 of both global securities issuance and official foreign exchange reserves. So the world's reliance on the dollar won't hold for long, and that it is imperative that an international monetary system is built that is worthy of the diverse, multipolar global economy that is emerging. Although China's rapidly growing economy and its dynamism are enormous advantages that will help promote the international use of its currency, its low level of financial market development is a major constraint on the likelihood of the renminbi attaining reserve currency status. Moreover, in the absence of an open capital account and convertibility of the currency, it is unlikely that the renminbi will become a prominent reserve currency, let alone challenge the dollar's status as the leading one. A huge gulf still exists between China and the US in the availability of safe and liquid assets, such as government bonds. The depth, breadth, and liquidity of US financial markets will serve as a potent buffer against threats to the dollar's preeminent status. The renminbi will become a competitive reserve currency within the next decade, eroding but not displacing the dollar's dominance. However, even though the renminbi will certainly not replace the US dollar as a global reserve currency in the near future, this does not mean that China cannot explore other means of reducing global dependence on the US dollar. It's hard to believe that if a majority of the world's population begins to lose trust in the US dollar, no other alternative could be found. When the dollar is no longer the dominant global reserve currency, the biggest victims would be American financial institutions, as a lot of their revenues and profits come from the global acceptance of the US dollar. Frankly, no living person can predict the consequences to the global financial system if the US dollar is no longer used to finance global trade transactions. The system is far too complex and interconnected. From the year 1 to 1820, the 2 largest economies were always those of China and India. Only in the last 200 years did Europe, followed by America, surpass them. Viewed against the backdrop of 2,000 years of world history, the past 200 years of Western, including American, domination have been a major aberration. Hence, it is perfectly natural to see the return of China and India bring this aberration to an end. What is surprising, indeed even shocking, is how fast China, India, and the rest of Asia have bounced back. If you compare the tabulation of relative economic shares in 1980 against the tabulation in 2020, we can see how dramatically history has turned a corner in recent decades. In these decades, America has refused to make any strategic or structural adjustments to this major turn in history. Indeed, to put it bluntly, America has continued in a straight line on autopilot, while the rest of the world is changing course. Can America make a U-turn and now make strategic adjustments to this new phase of history? In theory, democratically elected governments should be more flexible and adaptable than rigid and sclerotic Communist Party governments, as in contemporary China. Sometimes, however, practice is the opposite of theory. Some aspects of American society have become as rigid and ossified as Qing dynasty in ancient China. To deal with the long-term challenge from China effectively, Americans first need to ask themselves some simple questions. What are the deep assumptions about the world that Americans take for granted? Which assumptions remain valid in the new world, and which need to be questioned? The first assumption is that America will remain the number one economy forever. Indeed, this could well happen if Chinese society falters or if the Chinese economy gets caught in a middle-income trap. Yet, if one assumes that the Chinese people are as smart and capable as their fellow Asian neighbors, there is no reason why the Chinese economy cannot accomplish what Singapore, Japan, or South Korea have achieved. Clearly, the prospects of China having a bigger economy than America are realistic. It would therefore be logical to question the widely held assumption that America will be the number one economy forever. It would also be wise for American society to begin debating America's place in the world and how its domestic policies should adapt to this new world. In practice, however, it would be suicidal for any American politician to do so. One of America's most thoughtful recent presidents was Bill Clinton. After he left office, he said in a speech in Yale in 2003 that America should prepare itself for a world where America was no longer the sole superpower. If America is going to work out a thoughtful and comprehensive strategy to adapt to a new world, this strategy will have to rest on realistic assumptions about the future. One realistic assumption is that America will become number two. The assumption of staying number one forever is not the only sacred cow in American discourse. An equally strong assumption is the belief that American society is inherently virtuous, both in its domestic and international behavior. Perhaps, at the end of the day, this may be the fundamental explanation for the lack of a new comprehensive long-term American strategy to deal with the new world of the 21st century. Any realistic and credible strategy would have to question deeply held assumptions in the American psyche. Since it would be both psychologically and politically difficult to surface these assumptions for questioning, it would be safer for politicians to keep on suggesting that all America needs to do is to keep doing what it has been doing before and do it well, to keep America as number one. This is also the assumption behind America's Make American Great Again, goal, to neither reinvent America nor confront dangerous American illusions, all the while pursuing an increasingly unilateralist path. In short, America will continue on autopilot. If America keeps doing this, it will, effectively, present China with a geopolitical gift and allow China to eventually win a geopolitical contest that America blundered into without first working out a thoughtful, comprehensive, and long-term strategy.